Thank you so much, Carla and Elizabeth, for this opportunity. One of the things we definitely understand is that when considering attending school, affordability is a factor that's taken into consideration. You are here, so you are ready to invest in yourself, and you understand that. And our goal is to make sure that we do whatever we can to ensure that college is affordable and we remove as many financial barriers to education as we can. A bit of an overview of the things that we will be discussing tonight. Nancy will take us through an overview of financial aid in terms of the application process and the type of financial aid that is available to you. We do want to make you aware of things of academic progress. That's how your academics can affect your eligibility for financial aid. After that, Teresa will take us into an overview about scholarships and some tips and advice regarding the application process. We'll then go through some tuition benefits that students that are either active military or veterans may not be aware of. And then we'll go through another tuition benefit that some folks may not be aware of, employee-sponsored tuition coverage. And then we'll wrap up with some tips and advice and go into our Q&A session. So with that, I will pass it over to Nancy.
Okay. The first step in applying for federal financial aid is, of course, the FAFSA. And you can just Google, how can I submit the FAFSA? It's also on the slide. When completing the FAFSA, make sure that you put in the federal code for SPS, because we get emails from students saying, but I did the application, but we don't have it, because until you put in the code, that's what gives the federal processor permission to send us your very personal information, and it's what's needed to process your aid. So the FAFSA will, there's a series of questions on the FAFSA, which will determine whether you're you have to file as a dependent student or an independent student, and it'll guide you through whether you are required to put in parental information or you're not required. If you have trouble completing your FAFSA, there is a phone number that you can call, this FAFSA customer service, and I'll give you that number just in case. It's not on the slide, but it's 1-800-433-3243. I think most students are able to log on and just complete it, but if you have trouble, the feds will help you with that. For New York State residents, after you've completed the FAFSA data, there's a link that you can continue on with after you've completed all the FAFSA information. It'll say for New York State residents. That's how you apply for New York State aid. And if by any chance you miss that link when you complete the FAFSA, don't be concerned. Once your FAFSA is processed, if you haven't applied for TAP and we see that you're a resident, New York State Higher Education Services Corporation will send you an email inviting you to apply. I have spoken to some students that didn't get that email, but if you know you did your FAFSA and you think you missed the link, once your FAFSA is processed, you can log on to the state website, and again, you can complete the application if you've missed it when you did the FAFSA. The information on the FAFSA will provide a number that we use to determine what financial aid you're eligible for. It takes income, assets, number in household, whether you're dependent or independent. It takes a lot of factors into consideration. But once the federal processor massages all of that information, they come up with what was currently called expected family contribution. They're going to change the name to student aid index, because family contribution is very confusing to students who it's only them and they think, well, my family's not contributing, but really it's in that case, it's based only on your information. That information, as long as you've put the information, the code on, you will, and you're not picked for verification. I'll talk about verification. The college will calculate how much federal aid you're eligible for, with the exception of student loans. Student loans, there are colleges that package loans up front. SPS does not. In fact, most of CUNY does not. There are a few CUNY colleges that will. But if you decide you want, you're not getting enough aid to cover your costs, you can submit a student loan application. And at SPS, that form is available on the website. You would Google either undergraduate student loan application or graduate student loan application. It's going to take you to a page that will give you the loan application and instructions on how you submit it. It's a pretty common error that students believe that they can submit their loan application online. At SPS, they cannot. They have to draw it down, print it, and email it into the financial aid office. And all of that is in the instructions that are available online in the financial aid section of the website. Pell Grant, there's a range of the amount of money you can receive, and it's based on your student aid index, which is calculated by the information on the FAFSA, plus your enrollment status. And just an example, if you were eligible for a maximum Pell Grant of $2,000 for full-time enrollment, if you're only going 6 credits, that would be cut to half of that amount, to $500. If you're going 3/4, you'd get 3/4 of the award. So, you know, or I'm sorry, to $1,000. If your grant was $2,000 for halftime, you'd get just $1,000. It's based on both your student aid index and your enrollment status. For supplemental educational grant, college is given, CUNY is given a certain amount of money to give out, and it goes to the lowest income students first on a first come, first served basis. With Pell, if all of our students were eligible, we could keep requesting the money and keep making awards. With federal supplemental grant, it's a limited pool of money. And so the earlier you get your application in, your better your chances are of getting SEOG grant. And those grants tend to be small, probably around $200, because again, we have a lot of students who have financial need and there's a limited pool of money. But, you know, that's something, if you get in early enough and you have enough need, you may be also given a supplemental grant. Student loans, the difference between subsidized student loan and unsubsidized student loan. For a subsidized student loan, you have to demonstrate financial need. And it will take into account, you know, what the cost of attendance plus any other aid that you're getting. And if you have remaining need after that, they can give you an unsubsidized loan. For a student who has a higher income and doesn't qualify for any grant aid or subsidized loan, they still have the option of applying for an unsubsidized loan. And the difference being a subsidized loan, the interest is not accruing while you're in college and only begins to accrue 6 months after you either graduate or drop to less than half-time status. On a subsidized loan, unfortunately, the interest begins to accrue as soon as it's dispersed. So it's, you know, of course, if you submit a loan application, we are always going to try for subsidized loan first because that's beneficial to the student. The interest is not accruing. But for students who don't demonstrate financial need, by the federal formula, we know reality may be different, but they still have the option of applying for an unsubsidized loan. And with student loans, we always recommend that you borrow, you really think about the amount that you're borrowing, because as they've mentioned, those debts can rack up pretty quickly. And if you're unsure, think about it for a while before you request when you decide how much to borrow, because if you can get away with a little less, try to do that. Try not to have as much debt, especially if you plan to go to graduate school. Because for graduate school, the only option for federal aid is unsubsidized student loans. So if you decide, when you complete your undergraduate degree, if you decide you want to go to, if you think you're even thinking about going to graduate school, try to keep your debt down, because it will be only unsubsidized loans, unless of course you can get a scholarship. But that's a whole different issue. I'm talking about federal aid. And unfortunately, there is no New York State TAP for graduate students either. So most of our students who are in graduate programs, they will take student loans, unsubsidized student loans. Okay, New York State aid. Tuition assistance program. I mentioned before how you can apply for that. I think the code for applying for that was in the prior slides. It's 1420 for SPS. And to qualify for that, you must be enrolled for a minimum of 12 credits. If you're taking fewer than 12 credits, you cannot qualify, regardless of what your income is. The next program, Aid for Part-Time Study, that is for students who would have qualified for TAP, but are only attending on a part-time basis. But again, just like with SEOG, the college is given a limited amount of money to divide among students. So even though you may have qualified for TAP, when they give out the aid for part-time study, they're going to be giving it to the neediest students first. And then once the money is gone, that's it. There is no more to award. So with TAP, just like Pell, if all of our students were full-time and qualified, we could keep processing the awards and the state will keep paying. With aid for part-time study, it's a limited pool of money. Okay, Excelsior Scholarship is also for New York State. It's got very specific requirements. I mean, you can Google that, but you have to have not been out of college for too long, and it's very specific on what they're looking for. You have to go not taking a break from college. There's a lot of other requirements. DREAM Act Scholarship, that's for undocumented students. Although undocumented students do not qualify for any federal aid, they cannot get Pell or SEOG or student loans. New York State, if they file the FAFSA, they may qualify for DREAM Scholarship, which is pretty much, very much like TAP. And you can, if you're undocumented, you can apply for that. You'd have to file the FAFSA. We know you won't get the FAFSA. However, to get to the TAP application, you file the FAFSA, and then they can proceed on with the DREAM Scholarship. Above 8, yeah, that's for only, it's true, only for undergraduates. All those programs are only for undergraduates. Okay. Private student loans. Okay. Oh, the other thing I should have mentioned with Pell, although the awards are scaled, it is the only federal program that a student can receive an award if they are registered for less than 6 credits. It's not a huge amount of money, but they will award a Pell Award for less than 6 credits. And again, it will be based on your index and your enrollment status. Private loans, we only recommend that if you do not qualify for federal loans, and but you can apply for them if you are less than half-time. Most of them require a cosigner or good credit, and they do frequently have a little higher interest rates. On that one, the other benefit that's not on here is for a federal loan, you can't submit a loan application after the period of enrollment is over. For example, I spoke to a student last week. She was taking 6 credits in the fall, but with only 3 credits in the spring. She did not submit her loan application on time, so she cannot apply for a federal loan for the fall, and she can't do a loan for the spring because she's only 3 credits. She waited until during the spring to ask about loans, and at that point, since the fall semester was over, we could no longer process a loan for her. She was a student that, we told her about alternative loans, and she can apply for a period that was that is past. So I don't think they'll do it for years past, but for a semester, in this case, she could have applied for a private loan for the fall, even though we couldn't do a federal loan for that time. Okay. Yeah, okay, that's just okay, satisfactory academic progress. There are, both federal and state have requirements, but they're not the same. And we're not required to check them with the same frequency. For federal aid, after the spring semester, we're required to check to see if a student has met the GPA requirement and the credit completion requirement. And the GPA, for undergraduate students, they have to maintain a GPA of a 2.0 and complete a certain percentage of their credits. For graduate, and that is only checked once a year after the spring grades are in. For TAP, for New York State aid, it's checked after every semester. And if a student received a TAP award but did not complete the required number of credits, that will make them ineligible for the very next semester. Say if a student was required to complete 12 credits in the fall, only completed 9 or 6, they lose their spring TAP award. And they don't get New York State aid again until they've made up the credits that the state paid for in the fall that they did not complete. So a student who did not complete enough credits in the spring, the way they can reinstate their eligibility for TAP for the fall is to take the credits they didn't complete in the fall. Say if they completed 9 in the spring, they can take 3 credits in the summer, earn those credits. They will add them back in to what they didn't complete in the spring, and then that will reinstate their eligibility for the fall. Oh, you do have it on here. Federal aid is once, okay. For graduate students, of course, they have to maintain a 3.0 GPA instead of a 2.0 GPA. In addition to that, the completion rate is higher for graduate students. Graduate students must complete at least 2/3 of the credits they have attempted. If they don't, they're not making satisfactory academic progress. There is an appeal process, and the way a student appeals is they write to the financial aid, send an email to the financial aid office, title of the email, SAP appeal, SAP appeal, and for both, this you can do this for, I believe there's also a form on the website for TAP appeal, but they have to explain the circumstances that prevented them from meeting the SAP standard. It could be, someone was sick in the family. We saw so many of them during the pandemic, so many appeals as a result of the pandemic. But it explained whatever happened, things happen to people, it's understandable. And it goes before a committee. And if the committee approves the appeal, their aid is reinstated for a semester, and usually with conditions. Frequently, it's that they take only X number of credits for the next semester and complete everything they've attempted at that point with a grade of, for undergraduate, 2 or better, or for graduate students, a 3 or better. If they meet those requirements, the conditions of the appeal, they have the opportunity to appeal again and keep getting aid. If they don't meet those conditions, they're just not eligible until they get back on track with meeting the standard. Again, and for New York State aid, there is only one lifetime. If the student can submit multiple appeals, federal appeals, but only one for New York State higher ed for TAP. And that includes any appeal they submitted at any other college. If a student submits an appeal, we have to check to see if that student was already granted an appeal for another college. And if that's the case, we cannot process it.
Nancy, from the Q&A, we have a question that I think would be great at this part. The question is, what percentage of credits need to be completed to maintain aid?
Are you talking about for graduate or undergraduate?
They didn't specify, undergraduate.
Okay, there's a chart. If you Google, it depends on how many they've attempted. It's sort of a sliding kind of thing. And if you Google on the SPS website, Google CUNY SPS satisfactory academic progress, and you're going to see how, if you've attempted this many, this is how many you had to complete. It's more of a sliding scale than with graduate. Graduate, it's a straight up 2/3 have to be completed. But for undergraduates, it's going to have other. It's not just a set standard like that, but it is on the website.
Great, thank you. I popped that link in the chat. And then we have, before we move on to the scholarship section, 2 other questions. The first one is, can you explain what are the types of loans and what do they mean? For example, Perkins versus direct loans.
Perkins is a thing of the past. There are no more Perkins loans. I think you're asking about subsidized or unsubsidized. Is that correct?
They didn't specify, but I think it would be great if you could review that one more time.
Sure, of course. For a subsidized loan, a student has to demonstrate financial need. And again, that will go back to the information that was reported on the FAFSA. And that will determine if a student has need or not. An unsubsidized loan, it really doesn't matter what if the student can have a very high income, not demonstrate need, and still get an unsubsidized loan. The difference being the unsubsidized loan, and the reason they don't care if you get an unsubsidized loan if your income is higher, is that the interest begins to accrue immediately as soon as the loan is dispersed. So, and normally loans are dispersed in 2 payments, regardless of what the period of the loan is. So if you do a fall spring loan, and that's what we recommend if you're going to be in for both semesters, submit it fall spring at the same time. As soon as that full disbursement pays out, the interest begins to accrue on an unsubsidized loan. On a subsidized loan, the interest does not accrue until a student has either dropped below, it begins to accrue 6 months after a student either drops below half-time status, 6 credits, or graduates from college. And at that time, the interest begins to accrue. So basically, while you're in school on a subsidized loan, as long as you're taking 6 credits, you're not being assessed any interest on that loan. Subsidized and unsubsidized, it begins to accrue immediately.
I see here Dr. Marquez-Lewis. You have your hand raised.
Yeah, I had a quick question. I think one of the areas that students find really confusing, and rightly so, is the issue of compounded interest. Would you be able to just mention sort of what that is and why it's important that students keep that in mind?
Sure. On an unsubsidized loan, the federal processor will give you the option of paying the interest while you're in school or having it added on to the principal of your loan. If it's possible to pay the interest while you're in school, all the better, because if you have it added on, your loan is growing, and then that means you're paying interest on the interest. So that's sort of compounded interest. If you have the interest that's accruing added on to the principal balance that you borrowed, that loan is growing. So if it's a possibility to pay that interest while you're in school, that's the best way to do it.
Okay, and then we have one more question from the Q&A that I think would be good here. Is there can you elaborate on any aid that's available to out-of-state students?
Oh, absolutely. Although out-of-state students do not qualify for New York State aid, they're eligible for all federal programs. It's the federal programs are across the country, as long as they meet the citizenship or green card. You know, there's certain criteria. As long as they meet those requirements and the income requirements, it doesn't matter where they're living. It's a federal program that's across the entire country. So they're eligible for Pell, SEOG, student subsidized loan, unsubsidized loan.
Thank you
They're
so
eligible
much.
for anything that's from federal government.